Hi everyone, Abby here. Winter approaches, so once again I'm here in my flat. In today's video, while I know I'm talking to whoever decides to click on this video to watch it, in reality I'm making this video for my dad. For those of you who've been following this channel, you'll know I talk about my dad from time to time. I'm very lucky in that he's trying hard to be supportive and understanding, but I can also see how difficult all of this is for him. One of the reasons for that difficulty is because my dad is super religious. I can see the value that he gains from being part of his church, and I've talked about religion on this channel before. My views haven't really changed since then. I still feel that someone can be queer and religious, and I can understand and respect why someone might find strength in the church, or mosque, or synagogue, or temple. So I want to stress that in this video, although I'll be speaking to my dad with this in mind, by no means am I looking to convert or disrespect or denigrate his or anyone else's faith. But that said, there is something I need to address, as I can see how some of the arguments and elements of religion can drive a wedge between people in the LGBT plus community and their family and friends. Not to mention create a deep anxiety for queer folk if they are religious themselves. Now, this all came about through an article that you, Dad, shared with me. I don't doubt you came across it, read it, digested it, and then shared it in good faith. I know that you're searching for ways to help you understand me and my experience. I know that it is hard to come by good information, especially framed in a way which is digestible within your own frames of reference. You need to find a way to marry your love for me with your love for God and the church. I totally understand that, and I hope that this video will get you closer to this. So what's this article? It's an interview with someone called Sophie Spital titled "It's Not Loving to Affirm Me in a Lie" on a website called Premier Christianity. I had a little poke around on the website, and honestly, it's kind of interesting. Full disclosure, I wasn't able to read the full articles as I wasn't prepared to register or pay to become a member. But I clicked through to read some of the introductory paragraphs just to see what they were about. There are articles discussing AI and features from a variety of people from different backgrounds. Of course, it's all filtered through a religious lens, but there's nothing necessarily inherently problematic about that. This article, for example, about a man with neurofibromatosis, promotes the idea of resilience over revenge. That's a wholesome message. Another article asks us to remember why certain traditions are, and another looks at podcasts. It's clear it's trying to take on the modern world for Christians, and honestly, I think that's great. Religion can be a potent force to unite and support people in times of crisis, and if they can do so in a way which is forward-looking and incorporating the modern world as part of that, surely that's a good thing. There's also an article stridently opposing the racism of Tommy Robinson and being critical, at least in the introduction, of Charlie Kirk. Indeed, there are some criticisms of the American right, for example, about climate change. I can see some grounds where I would certainly agree with some of the content here. But that being said, there are several articles about being anti-abortion and a positive obituary on James Dobson, a deeply homophobic man who advocated for child abuse and conversion therapy. And unsurprisingly, it doesn't seem to have a great track record on transgender folk either. So that's the platform. What of the interviewee? Sophie Spital was a video editor of Trigonometry, a right-wing podcast and YouTube channel, which, if you scroll through, it seems to be predictable enough. Any channel that platforms Netanyahu and Tommy Robinson, there's that name again, and a bunch of other right-wing folk, we can probably know what you're going to get there. Anything on trans matters, of course, are clearly critical and unbalanced. Sophie herself, and I'm using she, her pronouns as they are clearly her own preference, seems to position herself as trans until she realised she was autistic. I'll withhold any judgment on her, but I will get into things a bit more as we delve through the article. And I won't go through this thing line by line. No one has time for that kind of thing, but I'll link to the article itself in the description so you can make sure I'm not misrepresenting anybody here. I'm going to touch on 3 main points she makes and discuss each one. Of course, I don't know her, and I do genuinely wish her well. Dysphoria is a bitch to deal with, and I hope she is in a positive place. But I think that hopefully you'll see that why she may have found peace through this journey, expanding how she did so out to a wider demographic, is actually rather dangerous. So first I want to go into what she says about her experience of how she arrived at the recognition that she is transgender. I can't remember a time before it because I always assumed I was a boy, and I had to keep being reminded that I wasn't. I kept experiencing these pangs of realization that I wasn't male. That took a while to work through based on understanding I was autistic, because when I understood the autism, I realized that I wasn't a man. I was a rarer type of woman. I would say there are two kinds of gender dysphoria. There's thinking you're the opposite sex, and then there's wanting to be. I sometimes experience the pangs of thinking life would be so much easier if I were a man. For example, if a group of male friends are going out for a drink to do something fun, I know they're just going to have a laugh and come away from it not knowing anything about the person's personal problems. I'd much rather be doing that than going for drinks with women, talking about their relationships and problems. That might sound trivial, but that kind of envy is the bedrock of the majority of gender dysphoria we see in young women nowadays. Most people identifying as trans or non-binary now are girls who never experienced childhood gender dysphoria. When they reach adolescence and the pressure of expectations of what it means to be a woman start hitting, there's a real hatred of womanhood and a fear of all the things that get thrust upon them. For example, being seen first for how attractive you are rather than how competent you are. These are added burdens that come with womanhood. So if you identify as trans or non-binary, you may be signalling, I'm not going to join in with those expectations. From what I've observed, the majority of girls who are experiencing gender dysphoria at the moment are in that second category. It's not that they want to be men, but they don't want to be women. Now her argument boils down to two things. One, she assumed she was a boy in early life, which she claims she doesn't feel now that she understands her autism better. And two, rather than feel any kind of physical dysphoria, she sums up her dysphoria as a kind of social discomfort or rejection or fear of what it means to be a woman. She then goes on to claim that most people who identify as trans experience things this way, without any indication on what basis she makes that claim. Well, there's a bit to unpack there, and I don't think I can do her first point much justice as I don't have enough information about that period or that process to talk to it. Perhaps that's how it was for her. But I can say that it does tap into the widespread connection between autism and trans people that I've seen here and there. It seems to either assume that being trans is a symptom of autism, or that if you're autistic, you can't actually be trans. Neither of which is true, by the way. I'm certainly not autistic, and I know of many autistic people who are trans. I also know many autistic people who are cis. While there have been some potential comorbidities between being trans and, say, having ADHD or other things, this could just be down to the fact that people who have been diagnosed as trans or having ADHD are in a therapeutic system, and that diagnostic process might have revealed that other thing. There are plenty of undiagnosed people out there, and we just don't know for sure if these are true comorbidities. Also, if you're trans and aware of it, the chances are you're going to be much more self-aware and introspective as the normal person on the street. This is a necessity to discover this thing, of being trans in this case. If you're introspective, you're also much more likely to notice symptoms of, say, ADHD or maybe even autism. So in other words, correlation, causation. And by the way, I don't identify as transgender, I am transgender. There's a massive difference. I even have a certificate to prove it. Okay, so to her second point about social discomfort or a rejection of femininity, I've seen this discussed in online trans spaces elsewhere, but I wanted to get a sense of things specifically from a trans male perspective. So I reached out on Reddit to see what the good men there thought. There was a general rejection of this notion, and even where people might have encountered others saying such things, they did see it as possible that this was merely something that was easier to verbalize. Dysphoria and all that entails can be very hard to explain, especially to cis people, but making it more about how you don't feel connected to women in this case, it's much more concrete and relatable. In general, I found the trans men that replied to my question had very similar experiences to my own. Many of them understood themselves to be trans long before they understood the kinds of pressures that Sophie claims they're rejecting. Practically all of them talked about how much happier they are in their new life as they're able to cast off an identity that they were deeply uncomfortable with and now feels easier. Despite the fact that being trans does necessarily make for a much more complicated life where you can face a lot of difficulties. Indeed, the notion that someone might look at the life that trans people have and say, on balance between that and living as a cis woman they take being trans, it's a little bit silly. And to Sophie's point about being trans as a reinforcement of stereotypes and people should remain cis and live life rejecting them, well, people did and do try that. They tried being tomboys or masculine presenting. They tried to live a life which still did not fit comfortably, and it wasn't until they accepted being trans and eventually transitioned did I find true joy and comfort. Even in the one case where someone said they'd heard others talk about rejecting femininity in the way that Sophie does, they still conceded those people are still happier after transitioning. Sophie says that if people affirmed her identity, this would be a lie and unhelpful. Well, to suggest that most trans people, are merely experiencing some form of social anxiety, this is beyond unhelpful. Sophie is right to call it trivial because it does trivialize our experiences. We're not trans because we'd rather have conversations with people of a different gender than the one we're assigned to at birth. We're trans because, well, we're trans. I find it easier to socialize with women as a woman because I'm a woman. I find it harder to socialize and connect to men because I'm not one. I'm not rejecting masculinity because I don't agree with the stereotypical toxic mindset men can embody, even though that's also true. I'm rejecting masculinity because I'm not a man. I reject toxic masculinity because it doesn't speak to me, nor does any other way of being man. And I know that because I tried it in a variety of different flavors. Also, the research is pretty clear. In cases where a trans person is receiving affirmative support, they are happier and less likely to self-harm. In other words, maybe this was true for Sophie, but it does not represent a large swathe of the trans community. So to speak to a second thing I want to pick up on, Sophie's characterization of trans as a sin of coveting. Wanting to be a different sex ultimately is the sin of coveting. Coveting to be something that by definition cannot be yours. God has given it to another, and what he has ordained for you is to not have those things. To address the sin underneath is what sets people free. So the Bible is fairly unequivocal. You shall not covet your neighbour's house, wife, servant, donkey, or anything of his. Now these are all clearly material things, and I can certainly get behind a message which says you should be more preoccupied with your own life rather than look at what someone else has and pine for that. Always looking and comparing yourself to another is a pretty toxic mindset and results in you never being satisfied, as happiness is only ever found through comparisons with others. And you will always find someone in a better position to you. But does this match the trans experience? Well, first of all, let's be fair and say that while the Bible provides material examples of what coveting means, let's extend this to more abstract areas as well. Let's say that you should also not covet your neighbour's looks or lifestyle. Again, thinking, for example, how obsessed people can become over trying to replicate influencers' lives, I can see how this is also a bad thing. But this still does not track with how many trans people talk about their experiences. While you will find us talking about admiring the lives of cis people, in some cases, talking about being jealous of the way they live their lives, in a lot of cases, including mine, transitioning isn't about to copy or match their lives. It's about becoming yourself. In example after example, you will find trans people talking about how transitioning has helped them shed the discomfort of leading a life which isn't theirs and stepping into an existence which is comfortable. And it is comfortable because it is theirs, and it is all about being fully oneself. I often use the word effortless to describe my current state of being. I'm not seeking to be anyone else but myself. When I was jealous of a cis woman, it was jealousy of her ability to just be. To be able to live a life unencumbered by the realization every day I was wearing a painful costume. Is that covetousness? Well, you tell me. I don't think it is, but I'm no religious scholar. Perhaps you'll hear this and find a sin there. But if that is the case, then I would argue that you're looking for it. This is your interpretation of things. And I'm sure there is something in the Bible somewhere about whether or not you should be the ultimate judge of other people's behavior. So the final point I want to raise is around how Sophie frames being trans around mental health and how exactly she came to decide that affirmation is a bad thing and how it's somehow sinful. However, the good thing is that it's treatable. So if a teenage girl is going to counselling because she's struggling with her gender, you can work that thing through. The talking therapy route used to be the gold standard for treating people with gender dysphoria. It's talking through expectations, what you've learned from your peers and your family about what it means to be a man or a woman, and all those fears can be alleviated. When I understood my autism, the sense of defaulting to thinking I was male went away, praise God. But yes, one still has to contend with these things that come up every now and then. I probably still experience envy or resentment, I just have to take that thought captive. There are difficult things about being a woman, there are difficult things about being a man, and I'm just going to say, God, you are good enough for the portion you've given me. I think it's dangerous to join in with affirming these ideas, of somebody being trans, that there's a particular right or wrong way to be a male or female. We need to celebrate the diversity that God has put within the sexes, rather than reduce it to stereotypes. So that affirming approach is wrong. The second way is much better, which is to treat it as a mental health condition, which is what gender dysphoria has always been seen as. It should be treated like an eating disorder or body dysmorphia disorder, where the person believes things about themselves that are not true. So it's pastoring them through this. But even better, and what Emmanuel did for me, is to look at the sin beneath some of it. Although I was treated with great compassion and grace at Emmanuel, they also did not shy away from exploring the beliefs that undergird this, which are not in alignment with the truth of what God says. It's interesting that she points to how things used to be done as an almost golden era of support for transgender people, and I would extend that to other LGBT people as well. Does she seriously want to regress to a time when people were criminalized and locked away in asylums? As an autistic person, surely she's aware of the type of support, or lack thereof, available to neurodivergent people, even 10 years ago. It's kind of wild to me that she's framing the past in this way and that she wants to return to this as if science and understanding has not moved on since then. But more worryingly, she's talking about conversion therapy. Where she talks about speaking therapy, this is conversion therapy. The process she describes is conversion therapy. Plain and simple, she was the victim of conversion therapy, and I choose my words carefully and precisely here. I expect she does not see herself as a victim, and that's completely her prerogative, but I will not mince my words here. Many abuse victims do not see what they went through as abuse, or that they are victims. I agree, and I've talked about this on my channel before, that for people who think they're trans, therapy is a must. They may indeed not be trans, and even if they are, there are a whole range of options to consider. You don't need to transition or come out or do anything if you do not see value in it. I realised I was trans years before I came out to even one person, and even then it was several years before I started transitioning. And such therapy needs to take place in a space which is non-judgmental and the person is helped towards the best outcome for them, and are not pushed towards a preconceived outcome. Conversion therapy is on the table to be made illegal throughout Europe and the UK because of how damaging it is. It's still legal in many places, and if you want to hear how traumatic this process is, I urge you to try and find first-hand accounts of survivors. But suffice to say, it's incredibly troubling. I don't think I need to make much more of a case about how promoting this as a viable alternative to the current best practice is dangerous. But for a website which seems to otherwise be open to asking difficult questions of its audience and looking to 21st century issues, this seems to be a very troubling blind spot. And I do wonder why this is such a difficult topic for a religious group to accept, given that there's an acknowledgement that we are in an era different from the past, and that they offer broad support for minorities elsewhere. Life and how we understand the human experience moves on, and there's a recognition on this very website that it does so. For instance, that person with neurofibromatosis years ago would have been shunned socially. Perhaps he or his parents would have been burned at the stake for witchcraft centuries ago. Sophie's diagnosis of autism would have been regarded as a clear sign of her being less than, but here she is being platformed as an equal part of society, as she should be. Not to mention other systematic practices in the not too distant past regarding covering up of abuse by members of the clergy, or the treatment of single mothers in Ireland or First Nation families in Canada. No doubt religious leaders are ashamed of those past practices and look at those periods as dark examples of their movement being tainted. So why are they still fine with demonizing LGBTQ+ folk today? Why can these religious groups not make the connection that they were wrong about how minorities have been treated in the past, but are also wrong about LGBTQ people's treatment today? I want to go to the very first sentence of this article. The church hasn't always had the best reputation when it comes to engaging with the LGBT community. And yes, this is why. This is exactly why the church has a bad reputation. If you don't hear our words and look for sins where all we want to do is live as ourselves, if you push us towards types of therapy which is deeply traumatizing and harmful and rarely helps in the long run, if you do these things and tell us this is about love, then you will be looked at with suspicion. Religion will broadly continue to have a bad reputation and it will be well earned. But I want to finish on a note of hope, of love, if you will. I want to reiterate that I do not believe that homophobia and transphobia is a necessary feature of religion. You can find religious leaders in spaces which are open and demonstrate that queer folk are welcome to be part of the church. Sarah Jones is a very active transgender Anglican priest, and you can find her on LinkedIn and through her website. The St Andrew's Wesley United Church in Canada live streams services which are for an inclusive audience. They begin their services by saying that all of you is welcome. That's not a grammatical error. That is to say that all elements of every person in that congregation is welcome and accepted in that space. In my view, as a layperson, but someone that grew up with the teachings of Jesus, I've mused on whether my own personal life can be part of a plan of a higher power. I've studied, amongst other things, biology, psychology, education, philosophy, literature. I've travelled all over the world, met people from all walks of life, and seen things I would never imagine possible. This world is a place of wonder. There are contradictions and surprises in nature around every corner. A world where transgender and gay and non-binary and intersex and neurodivergent people exist posits a world that is complex, rich, and special. It demonstrates that people, us, who were made in God's image, have such unique individual experiences that you must ask yourself if one can ever really know what being human means. Does this not also reflect the idea that one can never really truly fully understand the nature of God? To reduce us down to the result of sin necessarily makes the world smaller. Do you think, as a religious person, God would create a world that is simple and easy to understand, as some of you would believe? Or do you think your God has created a world vibrant with something new to learn and experience every single day, even though we as a species have trod this planet for so many generations? I can't answer that question for you, but I know which world I live in. And I don't think we've even scratched the surface of what's to know. I want to keep learning and changing and evolving. Do you? So thank you very much for watching this video. It's a little bit of a departure. You can probably tell this was scripted a little bit more than I would normally do so. And it's because I really wanted to make sure that I got down what I wanted to say fairly accurately. If you enjoyed this content, I would really appreciate it if you like and subscribe if you haven't done already. And as many of you know, I am experiencing a little bit of a financial hiccup, let's say, given my change in work circumstances. So I would really appreciate it if you were to buy me a coffee. The link is, well, the QR code is here. The link is in the description. And I would love to know what you think. I mean, obviously, these are all my views. I've tried to incorporate the views of other trans people where I can, but again, this is such a small sample size. I would love to hear your points of view on this matter. Do you think I've been too harsh? Do you think I've been too generous? Have you gone and had a look at that article? Do you have any ideas and thoughts of your own? I would love to hear it. I would love to see the conversation and debate in the discussion space down below this video. So thank you very much. Have yourselves a wonderful rest of the week, and I will see you very, very soon. All the best. Take care. Goodbye.